Welcome into Other People's Shoes, the podcast where listeners get to step into the lives of others and see the world through their shoes. Your host, Neil Matthews, is a seasoned interviewer who has a natural talent for empathizing with his guests and drawing out their unique perspectives. Through a combination of storytelling and insightful questioning, Other People's Shoes explores the lives of a diverse range of guests, from everyday people to celebrities and thought leaders. With a warm and welcoming style, Neil creates a safe and supportive space for his guests to share their stories, while also challenging listeners to broaden their perspective and think more deeply about the world around them. So tune in to Other People's Shoes with Neil Matthews and get ready to step into other people's shoes.
Hey, come take a walk with me, not like you used to do. Do something different and put yourself in other people's shoes. Open up your mind and open up your eyes and change your direction, change your perspective.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really excited, as always, that you've decided to stop by, say hello. Maybe more than just say hello. You know, I mean, where does that phrase really come from, where we just say hi and how you doing? And my good friend, I say good friend because one day maybe we'll meet, but my good friend Matthew West wrote this amazing song. He says, we're fine. I'm fine. You're fine. We're all fine. But really deep down under the surface, we're really not fine. And I think for some of us, we've still kind of been hiding in the shadows. We've been kind of walking away from things, wearing a mask. Well, I think we need to come out of that mask wearing. I think we need to stop hiding in the trees, to quote one of my other friends, Kevin Costner, way back in the day, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. He said, we'll find solace in the trees. Well, maybe today we find solace in our friends and come away from that. Help me welcome in my new friend, Fred. Fred, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Neil. I sure appreciate being on this with you and talking to you.
Well, I like the solace in the trees part, kind of an homage to your school of choice, that being Stanford Cardinals, and which is weird for me because, again, I feel like you're like me already. You're this big Stanford Cardinals guy out in Iowa, and people probably look again, like you said in the green room, hey, they look at the logo, they don't know what it means. I do. I spotted it immediately. I'm used to that. We see that in our Oregon area quite a bit.
Yes, you sure do. That's the only reason you know it. If you're in the Midwest, I am absolutely incognito.
Well, that's good. I do know it. Actually, our high school football coach, Bill Singler, was a Stanford Cardinal. And
really?
I can't think of another Cardinal other than Tiger Woods. So I am striking out on my Stanford Cardinal trivia. Oh, wait, the Lopez brothers, Brooke and what's his name? I can't think of his name.
Yeah, I can't even think of it myself. I should.
Robin. Yep, there it is. He looks like Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons. There's my Stanford Cardinal knowledge.
Yeah, John McEnroe. I'll add that to your list.
Ooh, John McEnroe. Started playing pickleball recently. Who doesn't love pickleball?
I used to stand in line for food with him at the dorm.
Would he get angry and throw things even back then?
He did on the court, obviously, not in the line. He was an interesting sort. He was sure of himself. Let's just say that.
Fred, I am excited that you've given us some moments today. I know a little bit about your story. I know a little bit about your writing story. We'll say that maybe, not your story, but your writing story. Great books come from your way of things. One thing that I'm curious about is this, before we get too far down your road, is this. What size shoes do you wear?
Size 14 wide.
All right, 14 wide. So that's not one you're going to find at average sporting goods store,
No.
I'm imagining.
One of my heartbreaks. It's hard to find shoes.
Sometimes it's hard to find the right shoe even, I would imagine.
Yes. Some brands just don't fit me at all, even if they're 14W.
Now, is there a certain brand for brand recognition? We're always soliciting and lobbying for shoe sponsorship. None have come our way yet, but maybe this is going to be the catalyst that propels us to that.
Because of where you're located, I mean, I'm just going to say Nike fits me really well. While not everybody likes Nike, I'm just going to say this. If it's the only one that fits, you wear it.
And I think Stanford is endorsed by Nike too, so.
Pretty sure that's true now.
Well, that's me. Like, I wear Jordans partly because Carolina is associated with the Jordan Jumpman brand, but I also I love that Carolina blue. So if it's on a shoe, I'm probably going to wear it, even if it's New Balance. Okay. Stop, you New Balance people. Stop it. I'm done with the New Balance hate on Twitter. Okay. So into you and into your story. So help me with this. Listen, I told a couple folks you were coming on. And first off, one was just, oh my gosh, what are you going to ask him? I was like, I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. What should I ask him? Now, for those that don't know, let me set the table here. You wrote this amazing book, you and a co-writer, book called Every Man's Battle. quick synopsis, if somebody's hearing that and they're like, okay, what are we talking about? Are we talking PTSD? Are we talking military stuff? What battle are we really talking about there?
The Bible in Ephesians 5:3 says you should not have even a hint of sexual immorality in your life. I remember when I first read that and it said a hint, I was completely amazed because a hint isn't very much. And this was early in my Christian life. And all I can say is at the time I had far more than a hint in my life. And what we're talking about when we talk about every man's battle is every last one of us as guys, we need to fight that battle for purity. It's not something that's just a battle for some guys and not for others because of the way our eyes are built. This book is about that, how to defend yourself, how to defend your eyes from all the sexual impurity in your environment. Up until that time when I wrote the book, the only books out there were books that basically said, don't worry about it. God has grace. Just pray. And that was very frustrating to me. Honestly, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to be free. And so I wrote a book with the practical steps you can take to defend yourself. And that's the thing that people have most loved about Every Man's Battle, the practical steps that I teach that you can take to get free.
It gives guys hope that they can truly, I call it a dragon.
Yes, that's actually a good metaphor.
I stole a little bit of it from your buddy Ted Roberts, who wrote Pure Desire. So fair to Ted, I sort of borrowed it from him. I don't think he'd mind. It helps promote his book because everybody usually says, well, why do you call it a dragon? Well, here's why. I grew up a Marine kid. My dad was always gone, seemed like, but when he was home, he was even still gone, if that makes sense. Like he was there physically, yes, but emotionally, man, he was checked out. And I don't blame him for that. I don't know what they saw. I don't know what they experienced. As much as I try to put myself in his boots, if you will, I can't. I don't know what it was like to be a Marine. No. I've met many Marines that said, you just don't know. You're never going to get it, Neil. Unless you go do it, you're never going to get it. With all that said, he never really came and explained to me the battle that a man's going to have to walk through. The battle of pride, the battle of ego, the battle of sexual immorality, which is a big word. He never explained those things. And so therefore I had to, and I'm thankful for this because in God's sovereignty, he's like, let me connect you with a church with older guys.
Yes.
Grandpa type figures. And I had a lot of them growing up. And so they really kind of took dad's place in a lot of respects. So a little bit of my journey there. In that, who was that guy for you that if he doesn't come along, Fred's story may be a whole different direction?
That's an interesting question. I would say the first man would have been George Thompson, which would have been in middle school. He was my baseball coach. And he was such a man of integrity and such a man of love. Even though he was a tough coach, he's probably the first man that ever made me feel like I was worth something, that I might actually become a man. He was watching me throw from left field one time and came running halfway out and said, Fred, you throw like a woman. You listen to that and you kind of laugh. He was such a kind man that he could literally say that without you feeling embarrassed. That's the kind of man he was. And then my football coach in high school was similar in the sense that he recognized my relationship with my dad and how poor it was. And he tried to make up for that. I would say those two guys, I mean, they weren't Christian. I wasn't Christian at the time. I didn't get saved till I was 23, a year out of college. I really believe that our view of our own manhood and then our view of our sexuality and how we handle our sexuality are very much tied together. If we have a doubting view of our manhood, we're going to have sexual sin problems. So just having those two guys build me up, give me kind of hope that I was going to maybe someday fit in the world of men. That was really important.
Well, Fred, that's why I asked that question. I sort of set you up because I believe that too.
No, I like being set up.
I had a feeling you had that view. Just had a hunch. And I thought, well, let's pursue that. I believe very much like you did and very much like you do from the sound of it, that my addiction, that my struggle, I'm not blaming my dad. That is not on him. That was my choice, my decisions, my all of that. Now, was that a contributing factor? I do believe that. And that's why I was hoping you could kind of reiterate that. Sounds like you believe that too. Getting into that mask you wore it for a really long time.
I did.
What made you finally say, okay, enough's enough? I'm done. It's time to unveil. It's time to let go. It's time to release it, whatever metaphor you want to use there. But what made you finally say I'm done?
In high school, the only thing I wanted in life was to be all-state quarterback. I worked out like crazy. I didn't pay any attention to girls seriously. I was just completely involved in that. When I got to college, I grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, went to Stanford out there in Palo Alto, 2,000 miles or whatever it is. I was so bone-crushingly lonely out there. It was hard first year or two. What happened was to kind of make up for it. I mean, I didn't really feel like I was much of a man or any of that sort of stuff, as I mentioned. And I started chasing girls heavily and got into porn. Went from being this pretty simple guy in high school to, by the time I was 1 year out of college, I had 4 girlfriends. I was sleeping with 3 of them and engaged to be married to 2 of them. And nobody knew about each other. Way off the reservation, so to say, and way off the tracks. Then I got saved. We can say Fred was a pig and we would all be right. The thing is, slopping around in that brought me to the point where I was so desperate God could walk into my office and introduce himself to me. And I got saved at age 23. And then I spent a year in church in a marriage class, even though I was single and I didn't even have a girlfriend. I just learned a ton about who I was, got cleaned up to the point, had no girlfriends at the time, wasn't even going to date ever again until I knew how to handle women godly way. Here's what happened. God introduced me to my wife, Brenda. I thought that would take care of my sexual sin, getting married, which it did not. I mean, I stopped porn before I got married, but I mean, my eyes were everywhere on girls around me. It got to the point where I didn't feel like I could even look God in the eye anymore to pray. Here I am kneeling next to my wife, was a pure virgin when we got married. Here I am. She's from 4 generations of Christians. And here I am, this guy that's trying to kneel next to her, knowing what I did earlier that day, what I looked at, maybe even self-gratification. And it just got to the point where I couldn't stand the lack of integrity in my life anymore. I wasn't the same as who I was in the outer world. It just came one day where I was in a car driving down the road, coming down this hill. I looked to my left, saw this girl jogging, and man, did she look good. And I lusted. And I remember just beating my fist against the steering wheel and saying, I'm done. No more. I'm not going to live like this anymore. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to learn how to build that covenant with my eyes. And the reason why I said that is I'd gotten that verse from Job. I just said, I'm not going to live like this anymore. And it was then that I actually engaged the battle. So I was married a few years in, couldn't stand myself, couldn't stand the lack of integrity. And that's when I engaged the battle. And the funny thing about engaging a battle, Neil, is when you finally engage the battle, the Holy Spirit can finally begin to truly work. Boy, he got really active in teaching me what I needed to do next.
Well, and I love that idea of engaging the battle. Again, being that military guy, I actually used that recently in a talk with some of our high schoolers. As I said, so much of our life, we kind of sit by, we kind of are idle, but God wants us to engage into the lives and the lives around us, and that we can't sit idle any longer. We got to engage. And I used a little bit of the Top Gun reference because a lot of the kids have seen the new Maverick movie.
Of course, yeah.
You get 2 sons, you get 2 daughters. I mean, you kind of got your fair share of both. So that's fun.
Yes, it was.
Who is the harder sex to parent?
Yeah, there's no question that it's the guys, okay? And the only reason why it's harder, men are built differently than women. Now, I know what our culture says. Men and women are the same. It's the biggest, most bogus thing I've ever seen in my life. Anybody who's had 2 daughters and 2 sons like me, there's complete difference between the two. Now, also, when you look at the hardwiring between men and women, the differences in their sexuality, did you know that men have literally 2 sexual pleasure centers in their brain? Sexual pleasure centers are twice as large as they are in women. We can tell you right from the get-go that the hardwiring is totally different. So you can't just say gender is all in your mind, for instance. You can't just say men and women are the same. When you literally look at how men handle their sexuality, men are very visual and women are very relational in their sexuality. And that makes a huge difference. If a son would look at a girl in a string bikini on a beach, eyes are going to draw in genuine sexual gratification, just as real as me stroking the thigh of a woman or the breast of a woman. It's that real. When you look at it under brain study, it's the same reactions. Now, for a woman, my daughter, Laura, I mean, I can still remember she was walking by an Abercrombie and Fitch store years ago. They always used to have these pictures of guys without shirts and 6-packs, and she used to be grossed out by it and go, what in the world? Why are they putting that up there? See, that's a completely different reaction than what a guy would have. Her sexuality is very relational. So what I had to do was teach my daughters how to handle relationships and how to handle the draw of that when it comes to sexuality. The guys, the first thing I had to do is teach them how to protect their eyes. I remember a time when my son, Michael, he ended up, you laughed about in the green room, the Iowa Hawkeyes. He actually played for the Iowa Hawkeyes. When he was only around, I'd say he was 11, he had gone out to the mall with my wife and my two daughters. When they came back, I was in the basement writing a book. So, I mean, I didn't go to the mall that day, and I heard them come into the kitchen, but I wasn't paying all that much attention. But this is what happened up there. I found out later. Michael came up behind Brenda and gave her a hug from behind around the thighs. He wasn't too tall at that time. And she turned around and got down and looked him in the eye and said, I love you too, Michael. He leveled this question at her. He said, with no warning, Mom, how do you get pictures of women in their underwear out of your brain? And she was just stunned. She said, well, I think that's a question for your dad. Before you go down and talk to him, what pictures of women in their underwear are you talking about? And he said this. He said, when we were at the mall, we walked by that secret store, which we all know is Victoria's Secret. He said, I looked into the window and I haven't been able to get those pictures out of my mind all day. The trouble with male sexuality is that scientists will tell us as men that when we look at something sensual, there is a chemical reaction that literally locks that image into our brain permanently. And he was experiencing that and verbalizing that for the first time. When he came downstairs, did I approach that with shame and, oh, you shameful boy, why did you look in that window? Heavens, no. For men, this is a problem we all have to grow through and understand over time. It's just part of growing up. I told him what I do when I'm in the mall. When I know I'm walking towards the secret store, I start looking the other way, and I just simply don't look into those windows. And I explained that I call that term bouncing the eyes, meaning bouncing away from inappropriate things in our environment. And it was through times like that I was able to teach my son, both my sons, how to keep themselves pure. I know my older son told me that the greatest thing I told him that helped him to stay pure was that looking at porn is the same thing as taking cocaine. In school, they talk a lot about DARE, drugs, stay away from drugs and all that. After hearing all that and then understanding that porn is like drugs, I had zero interest in looking at it. There were a number of times where people would bring something up on their phone or on their computer or whatever, and he would just turn and walk away because he wanted no part of that addiction. You understand that I needed to deal with my daughters and sons differently. But I can tell you that all four of them still to this day chase purity along with chasing Christ.
I worked at a cell phone store for a little over a year and a half. We had this old guy that came in one day. He's like, man, my phone's not working. I don't know what's going on with it. I said, well, let me take a shot of this. Let me see. And he goes, yeah, I just don't get this technology. And I'm guessing he was probably in his, I would say, late 60s, early 70s. He kind of shoves the phone at me. Well, as he shoves the phone at me, I realize it's an Android phone. So I'm kind of already out. Luckily, training kicked in and I sort of had to know what I had to do, even though it was an Android. He had probably about 70 to 80 tabs open of porn.
Isn't that awful?
And as I looking at him, I was like, well, buddy, here's your problem. I said, one, the phone I didn't know could open so many tabs. And he goes, I don't even know how those got on there.
Oh, sure.
I was like, right.
Yeah.
So I always had to be careful in those moments. Got it all cleaned up. And he said, yeah, I keep getting these messages. I said, well, show me the messages that you're getting. And he goes, I just want him to stop, but I don't know how to get him to stop. I said, okay. So we go to his Facebook Messenger and he's been solicited by somebody who is scandalously dressed. She's messaging, and I say she very loosely because I don't know. I think he was getting catfished, to be candid. And this person, we'll say she because that's what the photo was, soliciting him for money, that he had sent pictures to this person and now they were wanting money from him. You got more of an issue here than I can fix. And I felt bad.
Yeah.
Because, I kind of had to send him on his way. Like, that's nothing we get involved in. I said, but here's my counsel to you. I said, for what it's worth, I said, I would no longer have contact with this individual. And he said, well, I really like her. And I built that story to share and maybe to help with this. Do you feel like for you, porn was this fantasy, was this mirage that you chased after, almost like the horizon? Like you could never get to it, but you still continue to chase after it. And if you knew it was a mirage, why did you continue to chase after it?
Obviously, you don't know the women. From that standpoint, it is a bit of a mirage. When you get into the chemistry of it, here's the deal. I mentioned earlier that there's two pleasure centers. Well, the one pleasure center is the one that's supposed to be dominant in us as created created by God. And it's the one that has the chemical releases that you get when you have sex with your wife, kind of the warmth and that feeling of completion and connection, that sort of a thing. The other pleasure center is the one that's based on what we can get from our environment through our eyes. And it's more of the anticipation, the kind of the lust, I can't wait to get the new pictures this month at the drugstore, or I can't wait to get to this new website, whatever it might be. I'm older, so I can still remember that the only kind of pictures I used to be able to get would have been printed ones in magazines. Really doesn't matter which way. And here's what happens over time, Neil. So it's more this than the mirage. What happens is your sexuality and the looking at porn, the chemistry of it actually becomes a crutch in your life. I remember through high school, if I was playing poorly on a particular team, maybe basketball or whatever, I was ready to lose maybe my position. I might, for instance, masturbate in order to get a feeling of more control over the situation. Break up with my girlfriend, or she's acting like a witch. I didn't have many girlfriends back then. I did just have a couple for just a short period of time. You might masturbate to kind of feel like a man because she's making you feel like you're not one. Maybe you might masturbate to celebrate over a great test score or whatever it might be. Over time, what happens is your emotions get very tied to your sexuality. When anything's going bad, even when things are going good, you'll use that kind of make yourself feel better or feel more like a man. When you think about an orgasm, a lot of guys, obviously we like them. We don't really think about them. If you really think about it, an orgasm makes you feel like a man. It makes you feel in control for a moment in time, even though it's short. It makes you feel connected to another human being, even if it's just a girl pixelated on a screen. And when you think about those three things, and then you think about a disconnected guy who's really lonely, you can see the draw of porn. He's not feeling much like a man. He doesn't feel connected. An orgasm is going to make him feel connected and make him feel like a man, if only for a moment. And that's the real draw of porn over time. What happens is it becomes the way you use things in your life to deal with the horror of life. Life is hard, especially loneliness in life. I would say that would be more of the issue. In my newest book called Battle On, Battle Over, I spend a lot of time in that book talking about connection between manhood and that sense of getting our medication from porn. It's that sense of lack of manhood that can really drive it originally. And then, of course, it becomes a habit.
I've had people say outside of the church, well, it's not that big of a deal. My wife and I even watch it together, men say to me through the years. And I immediately say, so what does that do to her? He's like, she doesn't care. She likes it just like I like it. And it's fine. Like, it helps us both. And I'm like, but does it? I've interviewed drug addicts, battled that dragon of drug addiction. And they have said to me that one of the hardest drugs they ever had to kick was the drug of pornography.
Oh, yes. Here's another thing. You've probably heard this, Neil, that we're having a epidemic of ED, erectile dysfunction, among 20-somethings and 30-somethings. Can you believe it? The highest height of testosterone. We should never have any ED in 20s and 30s for the most part. Have an epidemic now. And here's what happens. We train the neural pathways of our brain to focus more on that secondary pleasure center in the brain. What happens then is that it rewires your brain to be more focused on the intensity of the experience, to be more focused on anticipatory and that lust side of it. And if we stop to think about it, what we can do with our hand and lotion and stuff while we're looking at a computer, our hand is tied straight to our nervous system. So we can always do the very next thing we need to do in order to get to that higher height. Then when we're in bed with an actual real woman, she's not tied to our nervous system. And so our whole sexuality is tied to getting to that higher high, building and building fast, and the lust. She can't take us there. That train is gone and she's got no ticket to ride. Here's the situation then that happens is that men can't actually have sex with a genuine woman. I was talking to a friend of mine. I actually got to know him. He's a Christian. He's at a different church. And he was telling me about his porn addiction and how it got to the point where I know guys say that they can watch that with their wives and then have sex. But over time, what happened was he couldn't have sex with his wife and get an erection. And I asked him how long it took after he quit his porn to be able to get an erection. It took 9 months for his brain to rewire away from that second pleasure center to the first one, to where he could literally connect with his wife sexually. I've talked to other guys where it takes 6 to 12 months. So all I'm saying is, for people to say, it doesn't really mean anything, it's rewiring your brain, whether you know it or not. What I always like to say, I was just thinking about it this morning, Neil. When we look at porn as primarily a moral issue, we've got it wrong. I mean, when you go to 1 Corinthians 6:18-20, Paul says to flee sexual immorality because it's a sin against the body. I literally feel that these porn issues in Christian men and non-Christian men, it's actually more of a drug issue than it is a moral issue. I can understand non-Christians saying, well, it's not that big of a thing because they don't really care about the morality of it, but they should very much care about the physical side of it and the drug side of it, because they're hooked and they can't stop.
I think that's the danger of it. And I think we're lying to not only ourselves inside the church and outside the church. And I would imagine, and I don't have any statistics that back this up, but I would imagine it's universally across. And I had a mentor years ago. He's a father figure in my life. As I already mentioned, I grew up in the church and had those guys in my life. And one of them walked right next to me during my first unveiling. You know, he said, any man you meet, because I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed because he found it, first. He was one of the first people that found it. And he said, pulled me aside, kind of that good coach, that good mentor, that good father again that should have been in my life but wasn't.
Yes.
He said, any man who says he doesn't battle with this is a liar.
Yes. Now, I will say that you can get to the point, though, where it's not a battle. I can tell you that I haven't masturbated in 30 years. I can also tell you that I have not gone to a computer or a television set, anything like that in the last 30 years with the thought in mind to find something sexual or racy. Now, I consider 30 years pretty strong, all right? I will also agree with him in the sense that every last one of us have to, at some point, engage the battle and learn how to handle our sexuality as men with integrity. That is absolutely true. And the fact that our brains are wired visually is the reason. There's no way you're going to be born male with a Y chromosome and end up never having to deal with visuality. I just feel like we as fathers, when we don't address this with our sons, it's a mistake. It's a broad mistake. And, you mentioned your dad never did. Mine never did. I mean, people, their dads didn't either. And you tend not to know what to do. Now, I wrote a book called Preparing Your Son for Every Man's Battle. It's designed to prepare your sons who are like between 10 and say 16 on how to fight this battle. And I teach people exactly what I did with my sons. And, neither one of them have ever struggled with their sexual purity. Now, I'm not saying they didn't notice. Like I told you earlier, my son walked by the secret store. Well, okay. I mean, he is a male, right? I mean, he did look in there and it did lock the image in his brain. My point is they never got addicted and they never got to the point where they were using their sexuality to medicate the pain in their life.
I'm guessing you're a movie guy, just a hunch.
Well, honestly, before I was saved, I was a heavy movie guy. There is so much sexuality and sensuality in movies now that I have to be real careful what I watch. So I put it this way. I don't generally go to theaters, okay, because I don't know ahead of time what's in it, although there are things online that you can go to and find out. Yes, I love a good movie. I just don't love the sexuality.
So jump in the DeLorean with me, if you will. I think you get that movie reference. Okay.
Yes, yeah, Back to the Future. Yeah.
So we're going all the way back to first grade, in between recess and arithmetic, because back in those days they probably called it arithmetic. Sorry, that was an ageist joke.
They did. Yeah, no, and I'm not ashamed. I am who I am, right, Neil?
What do you tell that first grade Fred?
I tell you what, I had already been introduced to pornography by the stuff that my dad left laying around. I was already at that point looking for girls to kiss on the playground, and I was sexualized. And I mean, I would say to my first grade self the same kinds of things I told my own sons when they were that age. And that's that it's important what we look at, and it's important what we don't look at. Not looking at those things that God tells us not to look at is very healthy, that it will lead to a strong manhood and growing up right if I would do that. I think that would be one of the biggest things I would have needed to hear.
Would your first grade self have have heard that and maybe understood that,
I
or
think
maybe not
so.
at that age?
No, I think so. Again, I had a father like yours. He wasn't a Marine. He worked very heavily. He was gone all week on sales. He would come home, work in his office all day on Saturday, and the only day I would ever see him was on Sundays. And he would nap his way away on the couch. I mean, I had no one speaking into my life at all. I didn't have any brothers, a mom and two sisters. I can remember from a young age being pretty confused about life. I think if someone would have just pulled me aside and said that to me, I'd have said, finally, somebody has shown me some boundaries. Somebody has shown me a pathway into a healthy future. I think I would have. I was always a bright kid. I wasn't stupid and I wasn't thinking about dumb things. I wanted to live in a way that made sense.
I mean, who doesn't want to find acceptance? Who doesn't want to be
Right.
seen? Those are my two things that I've battled with in addition to the dragon. What I'm wondering about is you and Brenda have been married obviously a really long time.
Yeah, 41 years.
That's a long time. I'm 43, so that's most of my life almost. So there you go. That tells you how young I am. The hardest part about this challenge, these books, has the enemy come in any way and maybe tried to attack you guys through your marriage in writing these books?
My wife and I, when Waterbrook Press called me, well, in fact, I could take you to the spot on I-80 where we were. They called me and said that they wanted to publish Every Man's Battle. My wife flat out panicked. Okay, because she's saying to herself instantly, oh man, everybody in the entire world is going to know everything about our lives. It was kind of hard for her. She panicked for 48 hours and then thought, Fred's book can help anybody get free like he got free. I have no right to hold back. She 100% got behind it. And purity is so healthy for a relationship, and it takes away, I think, most of the strongholds the enemy has in a guy's life. He hasn't been able to mess with me or with her. Our marriage is very, very strong. There have been times where I think in the middle of the night, she gets harassed by the enemy and she'll wake me up. And it sounds corny. I know it sounds, you try to get a visual of this, whatever, but I mean, I will attack the enemy and I'll basically kick him out of the house. And then she'll go right back to sleep and sleep peacefully the rest of the night. So you have stuff like that. And I'm not crazy. Look, grew up in the Midwest. I went to Stanford. I'm a basic guy. I'm not a weirdo. The enemy exists. He does try. Now, I will tell you that I think Christians have hurt my family more than the enemy when it comes to purity. There's a whole group of Christian is probably larger than the ones that want purity or the ones that think purity is stupid. They feel like the whole purity movement is somehow oppressive. And I know that my kids have taken some real shots because people will say, well, I'm Christian and I watch that stuff. They've been cut out of things, this sort of thing and that sort of thing. I think that that's just part of being Christian, right? I mean, when you tie yourself closely to God's ways, what happens in the long term is you're going to suffer like Christ suffered. And whether it's simple things like getting cut out of stuff or got a couple of daughters that are still single and they're in their 30s and they want to be married, it's hard for them to find guys that aren't hooked on porn or even care about purity. I know I talked to one of my daughters and said, Dad, in all of my life, and she's 34, she said, in all of my life, I've only met 3 men that care about sexual purity. That's you and my 2 brothers. Well, that's an indictment and a shameful indictment on the Western Christian church, don't you think? Probably the way the enemy gets into my family the most is just by destroying the American culture and then forcing us as pure people to live in that rotting culture because we don't fit anywhere in some ways. Now, I don't say that where I then say, okay, all of you people, everything I've just said, you should ignore because now you're not going to fit. I can tell you one place I really fit is with Jesus Christ. I mean, my connection with God, I would put it up with nearly anyone. My son, Michael, the one who walked by the secret store, I would put his faith up with anybody his age. He's 31. And the connection, I'm talking about interpersonal intimacy with Christ. In my book, Battle On, Battle Over, there's an entire chapter on finding that intimacy with Christ and how to literally do it step by step. When you tie purity with that intimacy, wow, life becomes pretty special.
Listen, I think so many times when we step out or when I step out, I'll make it a nice statement. When I step out, especially when I'm doing something in the faith, or even when I make a stand against something that I know is wrong,
right?
There are those haters that come.
Yes.
Maybe the enemy hasn't attacked you as much, which, hey, awesome, but you've seen it in the church. How has the church treated you? Because now that provokes something in me, because I would think most people would want to embrace this in their church communities. Yes. Evangelical or not. Help me with that.
Let me tell you a great story. Yeah, there's a large church up in Minneapolis. I love the pastor up there. This is what he told me. And I write about this again in Battle On, Battle Over. It's every pastor should read this book just for this one chapter. But when I walked into his church, it was so different than most churches I walk into, Neil. Most churches I walk into, guys kind of hold back. They're nice. They're just holding back because I really think they think I can read on their forehead what they were doing last night, right?
Like you can see their browser history as it like scrolls down somehow.
Yeah, exactly. When I walked into this church, it was completely different. Every man walked up to me with his chest out, chin up, warm. And I'm just like, wow, what is this place? Somewhere over the rainbow. I had no idea what I had walked into. And I asked the pastor that afterwards. We had actually a couple of hours just to kill before I got on my flight. I asked him, how do you have men that are this healthy? And this is what he said. He said, when I first started this church, I just had one building with 500 members. And he said, I could not get men to step up into leadership, to teach Sunday school, or to go on a missions trip, or to do any kind of leadership beyond being an usher. And he said, I just really couldn't understand it. He said, I even looked at their giving records because he said, I know that people only give to places they really believe in. And he said they were all giving. So I know they believed in the message, believed in what we were doing. I just couldn't understand why they weren't stepping up. And he went into prayer about it, deep prayer, and felt like the Lord was telling him that it was because of their sexual sin. So he got a few of the guys together and he basically asked them about it, told them what his concerns were. He found out that was true. And then he began to preach on it a little bit. And, more cockroaches came out of behind the walls. So he decided to do some small groups with my book, Every Man's Battle. He started with one group with 8 guys in it. And at the end of it, a couple of guys decided they wanted to lead their own groups because they had just felt like they'd gotten free and they were feeling healthy. And it got to the point, I'm pretty sure he said 40 these small groups going on at the same time with Every Man's Battle as the church group. This is what he said. The reason why guys weren't stepping up into leadership was because they were self-disqualifying. And they were saying to themselves, hey, I do not have the spirituality. If the pastor found out what I was doing in secret, he wouldn't want me in leadership. And so they would self-disqualify. And I asked him, I said, what happened once guys started to get healthy? He said, they all started to get up and start leading. And he said that the hardest part about being a leader of a church is that you cannot grow any farther than how many leaders you can raise up. As soon as I was able to start raising up leaders, he said, we started to grow. They have 8 campuses now, over 5,000 people and heading towards 10,000. This is a central part, this purity message, Every Man's Battle. It's a central part of everything I do. He said, if I expect to grow, I need to get men stepping up into leadership. And the only way to do that is to keep them from self-disqualifying. As you said, should churches really like this message? Well, absolutely. You can hear from that story. If we're going to take cities, if we're going to take regions, we're going to have to get our men pure so that they're not self-disqualifying. I will tell you that there are a ton of pastors that are really into this message and they want me to come and speak, okay? But then there are a ton, they don't want it because there might be women in the congregation that, well, don't you bring that man in to talk those dirty things or whatever it might be. I mean, it's a mixed bag out there. But for any pastor who would literally do this and literally make purity a central part of, say, membership, because up in Minneapolis, if you're a guy, you can't be a member of the church until you've gone through one of these small groups with Every Man's Battle. Because why be a member if you're not going to step into leadership is how he looks at it. I'm just saying that I believe the church has been so infested with sexual sin. I don't think we could take any region or any country. If we were to literally clean our men up, I think we could take the nation. I really do.
Well, and I think that's the challenge that we're running into on a global scale right now, especially in the States. I say that because we do have an international sometimes influence into our show.
Absolutely.
I would say that because I see so many guys that don't want to lead, that don't even want to lead their home. Let's not even talk about the church yet. Like they don't even want to lead their home yet.
One of the things, Neil, that you find, okay, I mentioned earlier that 30 years of purity, it's actually more than 30. I just used 30 because it's a round number. One of the things about 30 years of purity that I can see things that most people don't. You kind of see the effects on your own life over time. You see the effects on other families not getting pure over time. I guess what I'm saying is that the reason why I wrote my newest book, Battle On, Battle Over, was to essentially take the things I've learned in 30 years and to put them into a book. One of the things that you mentioned earlier that you believe, and which I believe very strongly, is that whole maleness connection, that strength of feeling like a man and knowing that you have battles to fight, a woman to protect and kids to protect, that whole picture of manhood. I wanted to tie that in with purity. The older I've gotten and the longer I've lived in purity, the more I see how tightly tied together those are. And when you look at that story about that pastor in Minneapolis, what you see there is that was a guy whose men, because of their sexual sin, they didn't feel like men. They didn't do what men normally do, which is to rise up and fight big battles and live great adventures. That's what men are built to do. Because of their sexual sin, they weren't doing that. And because they weren't doing that, they weren't leading. Now, it's my contention. If you ask any 100 guys on the street, you ask them this, what's a boy's ticket into manhood? They would all say going to bed with a girl. That isn't it. That takes you out of manhood. That literally does. I talk about that in the book. The fact is, what takes you into manhood is learning how to control the things that weaken you as a warrior, which would be sexual sin, rising up, fighting that great battle against sexual sin, winning it, and then knowing that you own the enemy and he doesn't own you. That makes you feel like a man, I can tell you that. Every time I walk out of my house in the morning, Neil, I know the enemy is saying, rats, Fred's awake, and he's out on the streets, okay? He can't get me. I can get him. All I'm saying is if we want to stop seeing men always saying, I don't want to lead, I don't want to do this and that. If we want to see men actually rise up and be the leaders in their homes, we've got to get them free of sexual sin because they're hiding. They're hiding behind bushes and looking at their computers and goofing off.
Well, and that's what resonated with me so much in the brainstorming session with me and my team, which really is just me and God. So, there's my team.
Hey. Not a bad team. Does he like Colombian blue too? I mean,
yes, he does. Yeah,
okay.
We call it Carolina blue. We don't really use the word Columbia blue. But that's fine. That's fine.
Cool.
I mean, that
cool.
is a shade of it. But in that brainstorming with me, and really that involves just getting quiet sometimes, which is a struggle I have. So, it does take some moments to get there. But in that, I kept thinking my whole time as I'm talking about thinking I want to do this mask series and really get to the point of unveiling things.
Yes.
Last week, he came on and talked about how he had this unmasking himself. And I think it was just such a good fit, you and him going back to back in these last 2 weeks that we've been talking. But in that, like I said, for me, I want to see people get free too. I want to see people get away from this because it is going to kill them. It's going to kill every relationship. I would shout it from the rooftops if people would listen, but I don't have rooftops. I just have a microphone and a podcast. So here we are. I'm still perplexed by this. I don't understand a church that wouldn't ever want you to be welcomed in. Maybe not red carpet. I mean, I get it. Maybe it'll be, cardinal red or crimson. I don't know. Maybe red's too much. Your rivals, I think they are, USC, they have this amazing phrase called fight on. And maybe that's not something you gravitate towards, being that it's from SC and there's nothing good that can come from SC. I don't know.
That is sort of true.
But I had a guy come on many years ago. His name's Todd Marinovich, grew up, in that California area, went on to USC, won a Rose Bowl, beat Michigan in 91.
I remember.
Played for the Raiders for a hot second. But in that, he walked through a lot of drug addiction. And that's part of what led to his demise in some respects in that arena of life. I go back to the phrase of fight on. Guys are such cowards these days. I grew up watching Chuck Norris in those Delta Force movies.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to be Chuck Norris. And the closest thing I've ever gotten is we share a birthday. That's about it. Has society gotten manhood wrong? Because now I feel like it's almost illegal in the United States to be a man. It's almost frowned upon. It's almost like you're shunned. Manhood almost seems like it's under attack. It's almost like we're an endangered species.
I've thought a lot about that myself. So again, showing my age, I came of age. The feminist movement was first starting. You're talking about the late 60s. I would have been, 11, 12, right in there. And then when I went to Stanford, oh my word, they were right on the forefront of feminism. And I can still remember going to little sessions, where they might have a speaker in to talk about it. And they were talking about how women don't really need men. And of course, they forgot the thing but men do need women. So, don't cut us away. They were saying that we really don't even think that we need men anymore. And that's way back in the 70s. Of course, it's gotten worse. Now they say we're literally toxic just to exist. One of the things I talk about in Battle on, Battle Over, I take John Eldridge's words from Wild at Heart that talks about how we are built for battle as men. And if you look at American culture right now, we've got it really easy. There's not really any battles to fight unless you're talking about spiritual battles. And I think, honestly, men have forgotten how to fight because they don't really need to, and women don't want them to. And so the only place they ever get to fight is, in Call of Duty or some dumb thing like that, twirl their life away in these video games fighting their battles. But in real life, they don't know how to fight. It's just gotten to be a real bad vortex and cycle downward for men in this nation. And I went through Wild at Heart with not just my two sons, but with my two daughters, because I want them to know what real men are, what they need to expect. Now they have me. Okay. I'm a real man. I'm kind of a goofus sometimes. I'm a real man, and they know that my last breath will be spent fighting for them. My last prayer breath will be spent fighting for them. And they understand it from example, but I want them to understand it mentally from a book standpoint. They understand, what a great man like John Eldridge says. I think we have to fight what the culture is saying. The women out there are saying, men are stupid, men are toxic, we don't need them. The men are going, I can't find any battle to fight. I guess I'll just sit on my video games. And it's become tragedy. So again, in Battle on, Battle Over, I wanted to stand up and fight against that a little bit, because to me, Neil, in my life, the greatest battle I've ever is this battle for purity, and the most fun battle and the most rewarding battle. Before I fought the battle, before I engaged the battle, all I could think of was, man, if I have sons, I'm never going to be able to teach them to stay out of this. I'm putrid and I can't break free. What I found is once I won the battle, and then I did know how to win. Oh, is it ever fun to teach your sons how to win so they never get caught? I have found this whole battle. Yeah, okay, I'm like everybody else. I sit in a cubicle, I do my work. And it's not like I get to pick up a lance and ride my horse and attack guys, that kind of battle. I'm in sales, and so, there's some kind of battle there. Real war happens in the spiritual realm. And if we will just stand up and fight those battles in the real spiritual realm, we'll be more fulfilled than we can even imagine.
And again, I think that's just the profoundness. I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it up. Profoundness of what you're saying. That is so profound to me of what you're saying. See, this is why I'm not an author. I'm a speaker, not an author.
You are the man.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So how can folks get connected with you? What's the best way? Where can folks pick up the books and all that fun stuff that we like to talk about?
Battle on, Battle Over is my newest book, and there is a website specifically for that book. So it's just called battleonbattleover.com. So you can go there and learn about the book. You can buy it there. Obviously, you can also buy it on Amazon and places like that. I have a second website that's fredstoeker.com. There's no C in the name Stoker for those of you out there wanting to spell it out. It's just STOEKER. So fredstoeker.com. You can get any of my books there. I would say that Every Man's Battle talks about the first vulnerability in our sexuality, which is our eyes. And then Battle on, Battle Over talks about our second vulnerability in our sexuality, which would be the way in which our manhood and emotions tie into our sexuality, as we've mentioned and talked about today. And for those of you who are wondering, there are only two vulnerabilities. As a man who's lived purely for 30 years, years, I know those are the two main vulnerabilities in our sexuality. So, and if you really wanted to get free, if you read those two books, you would certainly know how to defend yourself, to move out in an offensive nature against the enemy and win, because you have to win on both fronts of this war.
Well, and Battle on, Battle Over, you actually wrote with Brenda too, right?
Yeah. I should mention that.
Maybe every now and then.
yeah. I got that woman that lives with me, right? One of the things she does in the book is, we've talked about this a lot, is that every man's battle is actually maybe better said with the phrase every couple's battle. Here's what I found, Neil. When I work with a guy to get free from sexual sin, if it's just me and him, I might have a 50% success rate. But if I get the wife involved, so it's the three of us, I have about 100% success rate in guys getting free from sexual sin. You can read all about it and why that is in the book. But the reason why I included Brenda is she wrote 6 of the chapters. One of the chapters is writing to women. You probably know this is the first generation in human history that women are getting sucked into sexual addiction at the same rates as men. She addressed that in one chapter, but then in the other 5 that she wrote, she's dealing with, okay, how can a woman help her husband win this battle? And so that they can literally approach it as every couple's battle and get to the other side victorious.
Yeah, I just think that's so profound that she got to be a part of the book writing experience with you. I do notice, I'm looking at the website right now, by the way, which was super easy to find, so appreciate that. I did notice that the word battle on the book jacket or the book cover, however you say that, is in light blue. And then the word over is in crimson cardinal red, right? That was intentional?
Actually, now that you say it, I wished I would have thought that up. That was actually the designer, had nothing to do with that. But I wish I would have, so I could have mocked you right now.
Well, you could have. That I was setting you up. I teed it up again. You missed that shot. Sorry, mulligan on that one.
Slice that into the fairway or off the fairway.
Well, Fred, I just want to say, man, thanks so much for coming on. We're going to do some silliness right now, but I want to acknowledge what you shared. I want to acknowledge your vulnerability. I want to just thank you on behalf of the men who have come free. All of them don't get to talk to you every day, and so I got this great privilege, and so I just want to say I'm thankful. I'm thankful for the work that you did. I'm thankful for the work your team did in getting those books out, because, I mean, I have a feeling, and maybe this is where I get a little goosebumpy, and you can kind of see because they're starting to form. I have a feeling that great Rich Mullins song, "Thank You for Giving to the Lord," I think he sang that. But I imagine you get into those gates and Jesus, maybe you meet him and he says, "Hey, well done, my good and faithful servant. By the way, there's some people behind you. Can you tell me about them?" And you're like, "Well, those are all the people I'm bringing with me because I was able to, through your spirit, Jesus, speak to these men, and look at what you've done. You filled up heaven." You know? That's got to be an amazing feeling. I know it's humbling, maybe.
Yeah, my daughter, the one I mentioned earlier, she's a school teacher. One of her teacher friends at her school just came up to her last week, took her out to dinner. He didn't even know why he was taking her out to dinner. He's married. He's 55 or something, and she's like 34. Just teammates going out for dinner. He told her, "Look, I knew who you were after 2 weeks. I finally put 2 and 2 together when you first started working here, that your last name's Stoeker. You must be Fred Stoeker's daughter. And I just want you to know that your dad's books changed my life." You know, those kinds of stories, Neil, I don't know what it's going to be like in heaven. The whole thing is befuddling to me in terms of getting there to the gates and all that. This isn't befuddling to have your daughter say that, you know, her teammate said that without my books, he doesn't know what would have happened to his marriage. Thank you. Thanks to everybody out there that's read the books, and thanks to every man out there that's engaged the battle. You're part of the solution. You're my friend.
I appreciate that, Fred, because like I said, I wonder what it's going to look like. I hope I get to stand next to you because I'd love to see that happen, like see all these guys come free from that. That would be amazing. And the stories they may be able to share with you.
It'll be fun.
You know, because again, it'll be fun. I mean, to a guy that, you know, first grader to now, I mean, just an amazing thing. All right, so let's do some silliness. I tried through our friends from Jeff Bezos and his buddies, but apparently they misshipped me. We do this thing at the end of the show. It's called Senseless. I put a die in a cup. I shake it around. And so I tried to find a Stanford cup, but unfortunately they kept sending me this North Carolina cup. I tried. I really tried because I knew you were a Stanford guy. I'm like, I know just how hard you tried. Yes. I really tried hard. And then when I put one in the cart, Amazon's like, are you sure you want this? This is not your team. You don't normally order this. Yeah. I was like, Amazon, stop judging me. Maybe I want to spread my wings. And by the way, why is the logo a tree and not a cardinal? Have you figured that out?
Well,
like,
actually,
as smart as you guys are down there in Palo Alto, like everything you do is a tree, not a
I'll
bird.
tell you why. Okay, we used to be the Stanford Indians, okay? And so they were changing the name, and they wanted to pick something that would absolutely have no way to be attacked as being bad for the culture. So it's actually not a cardinal the bird. There's actually in the president's office a kind of a blanket on the wall that's the cardinal color. And so we're not even a tree, we're just a color, which is kind of embarrassing.
I did actually know that because of that reason. I mean, not the story behind an Indian. I never knew that. As far as it being a color, I did know that. Yeah. Well, we're a ram. I'm still trying to figure that out. How that
I don't even know what a ram and a Tar Heel. I don't get it.
Well, you ask players, like, what is a Tar Heel? They can't tell you. They don't know. Because I've asked them. I've had 2 Carolina basketball players on. They don't know what a Tar Heel is.
Yeah, and that tree is just one of the oldest trees on campus. So, I mean, all I can tell you is that. So, I don't. The whole saying, fear the tree. I've got a T-shirt that says fear the tree with a goofy looking tree on it. I wear that and nobody around here knows what that is, obviously. So it's kind of, it's wild.
You're alone on the island in Iowa. That could be a book.
Yes.
You're welcome. I just gave you a book idea. You're welcome. I expect to see that in print in about 2 years. Anyway, all right, here we go. I'm going to roll for you. This is senseless. You won't believe this, but it is a number 1. I know it's a North Carolina logo. I promise there is other numbers on there. It's really bad around here.
It is bad. Yes.
All right. Number 1 is this. One person you miss right now.
I miss my friend Scott. He lives in Wheaton, Illinois, and I don't see him. He's a pastor. Because of that, he's tremendously busy. And so I rarely see him. I actually met him in 8th grade in confirmation classes. We became best friends then. We went to Stanford together, went to high school together, been friends our entire lives. So
what would you say to him right now in case you send this to him or your team?
Yeah, I would just say, thank you. Without you, I don't know how I'd ever made it through life.
We all need a Bubba in our life, right? Yeah. I said Bubba from Forrest Gump. There we go. Yep. That's awesome. Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, you know what that sound means. It's time to go. I know, I always get a little sad too when we leave. But don't worry, we'll be right back here next week, I promise. It's going to be a really cool show. But before we go, I want to throw this out there. Ladies specifically. So guys, you can kind of tune out for a second. Just for a second. What man in your life maybe needs to hear Fred's words today? Can you think of one right now? Just give me like 2. Got him locked in? Lock it in. Okay. Will you do me a favor? Will you share this with them? I don't often ask you guys to share shows because I always feel like that's kind of weird. But in this moment, I really feel like this is the show. This is the one. Maybe it's your husband. Maybe you're not sure if he's, as I call it, battled the dragon. Maybe he shared that with you and he needs to be a little more vocal in his battle that he's beaten the dragon. And maybe this gives him the catalyst to go and do that. Just a thought. All right, now I'm going to go back to the guys. Girls, you can stop listening for a moment. Are we going to step to the forefront? Are we going to step up into this moment? I hope we are. And listen, if you need help with that, I'm one to help. I'm sure if you reached out to Fred, he would be more than willing to help as well. So just think about that as we wrap up today. It's time to take a stand. It's time to finally unmask and go fight. Don't forget this also. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Guys, thanks so much for listening. I truly appreciate it. And stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.